Today's daf is daf Hey, and we really should start with Gufa, but let's just quickly sort of be mashal and finish up what we didn't finish up yesterday. And we're talking about the difference between two modes of drashos. One is called Ribui Umiyuta, and the other is called Klal Uprat. And the Gemara establishes that with regard to Rebbe Shita, Rebbe seems to contradict himself. On the one hand, he seems to accept Ribui Umiyuta, but on the other hand, he accepts Klal Uprat. So the Gemara says in Bi'alma, as a general rule, Klal Uprati Darish. Rebbe consistently maintains the shita, the approach of Klal Uprat. V'hacha, but here in Pidyon Ben, Hainu Taima, because in Pidyon Ben, Rebbe took an expanded view, which, although it excluded shtaros for being poder the ben, but it accepted avodim v'karkos, and he applied the principle of ribui umiuta kidetani debei Rabbi Shmuel, because he was standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Shmuel, the ton Rabbi Shmuel, with regard to which fish were allowed to eat, the kosher. And we darshan in the pasuk, it says es ze tochlu mikol asher b'mayim kol asher snapir v'kaspes b'mayim. So it says the word b'mayim twice, and from that we're going to darshan a principle called ribuye umiute, and that's the sugya of dogin. And ein ze klal uprat ela ribuye miut. So since Rabbi Shmuel adopted the view of mute and ribuya mute, so therefore Rebbe accepted that. The Gemara now asks for Rabbanon, who reject Rebbe, and they learn Pidyon Ben as a prat klal uprat, which means ein beklal elamash befrat, which means that we have to exclude avodim and karkos, because matbea sloim, that's metaltalin. Omer Avina kida amri b'marava kol mokum shata motzi shtei klolos asmuchos zelozeh is hatel prat beinehem vidunam beklal uprat. So the Rabbanan adopted the position of the Bnei Eretz Yisrael that whenever you see two klolos, two general rules, and following those two general rules, you see a detail, a prat, an exclusion, then you take the prat from that's located after the two klolim and you lift it by crane and put it down in between the two klolim. And that's why in the case of Pidyon Ben, the Rabbanan hold that we're going to darshan klal pratu klal. Gemara asks the following question: Hashta di Amrit Rebbe Kloliu Prati Dorish, that Rebbe, as a general rule, will use the method of Klalu Prat, not Ribuy Miut, Bal Karcha Kasha Shvuos. Now, in the Mishnah here at the beginning of Shvuos, it says Shtayim Shein Arba, and the pasuk says, "O nefesh kisi shava levate b'sfasayim lahara o lehetiv lechol asher yevate adam b'shvua." And we have here in this pasuk a perfect drasha of klal, prat, uklal. It starts with the klal of levate b'sfasayim, and it ends with the klal of lechol asher yevate adam, and in the middle you have lahara lehetiv. Now, lahara lehetiv indicates the future tense. he takes upon himself either not to eat in the future, which is called lahara, or to eat in the future, which is called lahetiv. But there's no indication in the pasuk of lahara lahetiv that it should include lahara. So if that be the case, if all the chiyuv shvua in the parsha in Vayikra Hey is only li'asid, then you don't have shtaim shein arba. Ela b'shvuas nasiv aliv de Rabbi Akiva. Apparently, if Rebbe was so same that the shtaim shein arba in our Mishnah, the beginning of shvuas, he must be accepting the shita of Rabbi Akiva, and that is ribui umiut uribui, and therefore we're going to be mechayev you a korban even on a shvua l'sha'avar, which means lo achalti or achalti. That would be shtaim shein arba, and that's going to be Rabbi Akiva's shita, derived from ribui umiuti. Now, Rebbe, on the other hand, holds that the proper way to darshan is going to be klal pratu klal. And since the prat here is li'asid, meaning lahara lahetiv, therefore, ein beklal el masha befra. So we're going to whittle it down only to a shvul li'asid, according to Rebbe. That's what the Gemara adds here, v'leilo svirale, that in fact Rebbe never accepted Rabbi Akiva. So the shtaim shein arba in our Mishnah is not Rebbe's view, it's rather Rebbe expressing or presenting the view of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so that's more or less what we wanted to finish up from yesterday. And we may move on to Gufa. Minayin she'eno chayev ela al sheyesh ba yediyat b'tchila b'sof. So we're talking about what's called tumas migdash v'kadashav, which means he forgot he was tamei, and either he ate kodshim or he entered into the Beis Hamikdash. He's chayev a korban ola v'yored. And the situation is such that he originally knew, he was well aware of the fact that he was tamei. Then he forgot that he was tamei, went into the Mikdash or ate kodshim, and then he reminded himself that he was tamei. How do we know that this is what the Torah has in mind? Talmud lomer v'nelam shnei pa'amin. So the pasuk of Vayikra Hey again, v'nela mimenu v'hu tamei v'yashem, v'nela mimenu v'hu yada v'yashem. Twice it says v'nela mimenu. So from the first v'nela mimenu, we're going to derive the conclusion that you need helem tuma, that this parsha of korban ola means he forgot he was tamei. But not helem migdash or helem kodesh. What happens if he knew he was tamei, he didn't know that this was the migdash, or that this food stuff that he's eating is hegdesh? Well, that I couldn't learn from one v'nelam, but we have a second v'nelam, and that second v'nelam is superfluous. So what are we going to do with the second v'nelam once we have the first v'nelam? And the answer is we're going to take the second v'nelam and place it before he entered into the Mikdash or ate kodshim. And that's going to teach me that he had a idea before he went into the Mikdash or ate the kodshim. He knew he was, at one point in time, that he was tamei. Again, if he never knew he was tamei, then there's no chiyuv korban. He may need, as we said on Daf Beis, the kapara of the sa'ir and the chatas of Yom Kippur, but not, he doesn't bring a korban himself. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva needs one vehelem to teach you that he was matame the migdash or the kodshim, the hegdesh. And the second vehelem tells me that he originally knew about his Tuma state, and then he forgot it. But Rebbe Omer ain't tzorach. Rebbe says, you know what? I don't need Vinelam to teach you that he was once aware of his tuma and then he forgot it. The pasuk says vuyada. Vuyada means that at some point in time he knew that he was tameh. Harehu omer v'nelam, right? So it says v'nelam v'yoda, meaning he forgot and then he realized it at the end. Michlal sheyada v'huyoda. I'm sorry, Michlal sheyada, meaning before he forgot about it, he knew about it. And then it says v'huyoda, which indicates a second awareness. So that second awareness is going to have to be after he forgot. So you had one awareness, he forgot, and then Vuyotani became aware of his state of Tuma. Vinkain Matamid Loma Nela. I mean, according to Rebbe, I don't need an extra pasuk v'nelam to tell me that he was once aware of his Tuma. I know that from one v'nelam. And the second Yediyah, which came after he entered into the Mikdash Kodesh, that I know from Vuyada. So the second V'nelam now is free, is panui. It's not being used. In Kei Matam Alon V'nemas, according to Rebbe, why do I need the second V'nelam? Is L'chayev al Helim Tumav al Helim Mikdash. In other words, not only, and here Rebbe is taking disagreeing with Rabbi Akiva. Not only is he chayav a korban olav yored when he forgot his tumah, but even if he forgot that this is Hegdesh or this is the Beis Hamikdash. Let's just think for a second. According to Rabbi Akiva, we need to darshan both vanillams. Let's just think how that works out. The first vanillam teaches me that he knew about his tumah and then he forgot about his tumah. So what's the second vanillam according to Rabbi Akiva? Just give me a second. I'm trying to figure out why Rabbi Akiva needs two vanillams. I'm sorry. Anybody have anything to say about that? Why does Rabbi Akiva need two vanillums? I'm going to read it one more time and then we'll go on. Minayin she'eno chayav ela al sheyesh ba yedi b'tchilu yedi b'sof heli beitayim. Talmudom v'nelam shtei piyom. I think what's happening here is that according to Rabbi Akiva, it says v'nelam imenu v'hu tameh. And Rabbi Akiva needs that first v'nelam to tell you that v'hu tameh. What he forgot about was the fact that he was tameh, as opposed to a case where he was aware of his tumah, but he wasn't aware of the fact that he's eating kosher. So the first v'nelam according to Rabbi Akiva, again, this is Berzon talking. I hope I'm right. The first v'nelam according to Rabbi Akiva is a miyut, and you read it together with v'nelam imenu v'hu tameh, and the tumah here is in him, to the exclusion of the case where he's aware of his tumah, but the v'nelam was in the kodesh or the migdash. The second v'nelam is going to teach me that you had to have a yediyah b'tchila. Rebbe, on the other hand, doesn't darshan that mute. And therefore, according to Rebbe, one nelam will be sufficient, will already be enough to teach me that he was aware and then he forgot of his tumah. Why a second v'nelam? The second v'nelam is a case where he was unaware of the fact that this is the migdash or this is the kosh. Omar Ma. V'nelam, according to Rebbe Michal Sheyada, my mashma, how do you know that the word v'nelam means that he had a yediyah? Omar Rava midalok siv aluma mimenu. You have to know a lot of digduk here. According to grammatical rules, if he never knew about it, then it would be aluma mimenu, meaning the whole thing was concealed from him. But vanilla means it became concealed from him. Amalei Abai says to Rava El Meata, according to you, that whenever you see the word v'nelam, it means that he knew about it and he forgot about it, is l'gabi sota, d'chsiv v'nelam me'eni ha'isha, implying that at one point he knew that she had violated the stira or that she had a relationship with another man. Michlal davi yada me'ikara, he knew it before. Now, if he knew it before, then the whole parsha makes no sense. Why? Because then the whole parsha of B'dikas Mayim would not be in place. There's no B'dikas Mayim if he's guilty of violating whatever Aveira it might be with his wife that's now suspect, etc. Because Vatanya v'nika ishme ovam va'isha hahi tisas avona. So when does the Mayim Hamaorim operate? It's only if v'nika ha'ish. Bisman she'ish menuka mi'avon, amayim bodka v'sishto, ein ha'ish menuka mi'avon, ein amayim bodka moso. So classically what that means is that after the Kini and Stira, he had a relationship with his wife, and then he's not menuka mi'avon. He's guilty of a sin because halacha is that the Stira generates an Iser al bailash. He's not allowed to have a relationship with her at this point. But if you're telling me that he knew originally about the stira, and then he had a relationship with her, then there's no bedikas mayim hamaorim. Visu, and furthermore, it's difficult. Gabi Torah, right? There's a parsha in Eov, which describes the greatness and the infinity of the Torah. And the ksiv v'nelma me'enei kol chayu me'of hashamayim nistera. Again, the word is v'nelam in the feminine v'nelma, which means that what the animals knew the Torah and then they forgot the Torah. Michal te'ika dehavi yodebe. That at the beginning of the process they knew and they appreciated the infinite value of Torah. And v'aksiv lo yoda enosh erka, right? No living creature ever was able to evaluate the Torah. So how could you learn v'nelam or v'nelma is bit you knew and then you forgot? I mean, when you're talking about the Of Hashamayim and Kol Chai, I mean, you're not talking about the fact that they knew the Erech HaTorah and then they forgot about it. They never could comprehend the Erech HaTorah. They don't have that intelligence level. Elo Amar Abai Kosover Rebbe Yedias Beis Rabbo. Wow, this is a pretty big revolution. Abai is saying that according to Rebbe, Yediyah here does not mean that he knew he was Tameh, but rather he was aware of the fact that if you come in contact, let's say, with a sheretz, a dead sheretz, then you contract tumah. That he was aware of. And that's Yediyah's base rabble, because that's something that they teach the children. The children have to know. Again, today it's a little less relevant because we don't have tumah v'tar, but back in the day, the children have to know not to come in contact with the dead sheretz. And Yediyah space Rabo Shma Yediyah. Now, as far as the halacha of a chiyuv carbon ol v'yored for tuma b'shogeg, when he went in b'shogeg tameh, he knew about the concept of sheretz and contact with the sheretz would be metame, but that's about all he knew. So what does vanilla mean? According to Rebbe at Abai's frame of reference, Rebbe is coming to be excluded from Nelam if he didn't even have the idea of base rabbo. He was never even taught that contact with the dead sheretz would lead to contracting tumah. But what would be the case where you chayiv a korban ovlio? It means in your childhood they taught you in the base Rebbe that a person who comes in contact with a sheretz contracts tumah. So he knew that he had come in contact with the sheretz, and therefore he contracted tumah, but he didn't pay attention to the fact that he's tameh and he's not allowed to go into the mikdash. I mean, all these calculations somehow evaded him. Normally, Rav Papa Abaye, Rav Papa objects to Abaye, and he says the following: the Mishnah says at the very beginning of the Masechta, "Ein ba yediyah b'tchila v'yesh ba yediyah b'sof." That there's a case where he doesn't have a yediyah at the beginning, but later on he had a yediyah. I mean, if you say yediyah means he knew about his tumah and then he forgot about his tumah, that makes sense. But if you're going to say yediyah means what he learned in his base Rebbe, so what does it mean that in the middle between the first yediyah and the last yediyah he had halama? What do you mean he had halama? He didn't realize that that you contract tumah when you have contact with a sheretz. And not only that, you're telling me that there's a case of ein ba yediyah. What does that mean, ein ba yediyah? Ein ba yediyah b'tchila. It means he never went to school. You know, he wasn't a cheder bacher. Mi ika de lesle yediyah space rabo. somebody who didn't learn in his youth that you're not allowed to come in contact with the sheretz because it's going to be metame you. Everybody knows that. Amalei Sabai responds to this objection of a pup, and he says, I could have a case of someone who never went to a school. He didn't have that Beit Sefer Yisodi, that first grade school where they teach you about Tuma and Shrotzim. Betinok Shenishba ben Anochim. So it means as a baby, Nebuch, he was taken in captivity and raised amongst the Goyim. He never ever knew that if you come in contact with the sheretz, then you contaminate yourself. He never knew that. Amalei in mishkachas lebetinok shenishba ben Anochim. So this is a case of ein ba yediyah b'tchila. It's very interesting for me personally because this concept of tinok shenish ben hagoyim is something that I heard for the last 50 years, more than that. I always knew about it, but never in this context. I never thought it had anything to do with the chiv karbanol v'yorid in the case of Tommy and who's Tommy the Migdash or the Kodesh. I mean, to me, tinok shenish ben hagoyim is an issue about how we relate to non-religious Jews. And without being judgmental about it, we call them tinok shenishpu. They don't know any better. They never got a Jewish education. My wife showed me a great story in Mishpacha magazine this last week. I think his name is the rabbi who tells the Rabbi Eisenman. He has a column, A View Through the Window, it's called. Anyway, he talks about a young man who had zero education, but his father wanted him to have a bar mitzvah. And basically, he wanted to tell the conservative or reform synagogue to save a certain Shabbos that his son could have a bar mitzvah, and they wrote him down for that Shabbos. So it turns out that Shabbos was Shabbos HaGadol. And the rabbi of the conservative synagogue said, "There's a mistake here. You can't give the bar mitzvah boy, the maftir, let's say, and have him learn Torah on Shabbos HaGol because the Rav, as the rabbi, I get." So again, even in a conservative synagogue, the rabbi would get, maftir on Shabbos HaGol. That was appelled to me. But anyway, so what happened is his father was desperate because they wanted to. Exclude him, and therefore he went to some old Orthodox shul. He met with the rabbi there, and he said, "My son has a bar mitzvah coming up. It's Shabbos HaGadol. Would you allow him, to read the maftir?" So the rabbi said, "Yeah, but the only thing is, we have 2 weeks before we get to Shabbos HaGadol, and I'd like to teach him about the maftir so he understands what he's reading. So I'd like him to come to learn with me." So he taught him and he tutored him for 2 weeks. Today, the kid is a Rosh Hashiva. He became a Baal Tshuva because of those 2 weeks that he learned with the Orthodox rabbi in some shtetl somewhere in Noisville, and all because the conservative rabbi would not allow him to have his bar mitzvah because he wanted the covet of the rabbi should say the maftir. It's an amazing story. It's a true story. Okay. Yitzias HaShabbos Shtayim Shein Arba. So now we get a little bit into the laws of Hotzah of Shabbos. Tanan Hossam. Now, our Mishnah is very concise. All it says is Yitzias HaShabbos Shtayim Shein Arba, but the parallel Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Shavuos is much more wordy and extensive. And it says Yitzias HaShabbos Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim, Ushtayim Shein Arba Bachutz. Right, so bifnim means the balabais is inside the reshus hayachid. Bachutz means the poor person, is outside the reshus haramim. And you could have two sets of hotzah and hachnosa, meaning what? You can have a case of hachnosa where the ani brings something into the rishus hayochid. That's called hachnosa. Or you could have a case where the balabayas on the inside takes something from the ani. That's also called hachnosa. And you could have another variation where you have hotzah, where either the ani puts his hand in and the balbais puts something in his hand, let's say a loaf of bread or whatever it is, and he takes it out. So he's taking it from Rishus Hayochid out to Rishus Harabim. Or alternatively, the balbais has a loaf of bread and he puts his hand into the Rishus Harabim to drop it into the hands of the ani. So all these variations are indicated by the Mishnah at the beginning of Shabbos. Here, the Mishnah at the beginning of Shavuos doesn't go into all these details about the various the scenarios, the various possibilities of setting up a hachnosa, a hotzah, a hachnosa of the balbayis, hachnosa of the oni, etc., etc. So the Gemara says, Maishna hacha, why here at the beginning of Shavuos is the Tana Shtaim Shein Arba V'Sulo. That's all the Mishnah says is Shtaim Shein Arba, period. U'Maishna Hasam, the Tani Shtaim Shein Arba V'Fnim, U'Shtaim Shein Arba V'Chutz. Meaning you could have Shtaim Shein Arba for the Oni who's outside, in the Chutz you could have Shtaim Shein Arba for the Ashir, the Balabais who's on the inside in the Rishus HaYachid. And the Gemara answers, Hasam, the Ikar Shabbos, who there when the Mishnah is introducing the entire Maseches Shabbos, then that's called Ikar Shabbos. That's the right place to learn and to teach about Shabbos. Is Tani Avos Vitoldos. It's going to give you both Hachnosos and Hotzos. Now the assumption is that Hotzah, when the object is taken from Rishus HaYachid out to Rishus Harabim and put down in Rishus Harabim, that's the Av Malach of Hotzah. And the told of Hotzah is when you take the object from Rishus Harabim and enter it into the Rishus HaYachid. That's called Achnosa, and that's a told. So the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos is going to go through the ovals and the toldos, because that's Ikar Shabbos, and therefore it's going to give you not only the variations of Hotzah, but also the variations of the tolda, namely Hachnosa. Hacha here, on the other hand, in Shavuos, where it only comes in through the back door through Shtaim Shein Arba, is the Lav Ikar Shabbos. So we're not dealing here in Masechta Shavuos with the laws of Shabbos, but by and by it comes in through the back door. Therefore, Tani Avos Vitoldos Lo Tani. We're not interested in Hachnosa. You can cut it in half. We're only interested in 50%, which is the Av, and that's the case of Hotzah. The Gemara doesn't like it. Avos Mainiu Yitzios. Right? What is the Av of Melech Hotzah when you take it from Rishus HaYachid out into Rishus Harabim? Is Yitzios Tarte Havyan. Right? There are only two Yitzios, because either the Oni puts his hand in and takes something out, or the Valabais has something in his hand and he exits his hand, I'll use that word, into Rishus Harabim to give it to the Oni. So that's only Shtayim. So where are you going to get Shtayim Shein Arba in our Mishnah? Meaning in Shavuos. Maybe you'll answer, Mehen L'chiv Mehen L'ptur. So maybe what the Mishnah wants to establish here is, even if we focus exclusively on Hotzos, where the object is going from Rishus HaYachid out into Rishus Harabim, nevertheless we can have four different variations, four variant scenarios, of which two are chayev and two are potter. For example, if let's say the Balbais is holding on to a kikar And instead of laying it down to the open hands of the Oniat Rishus Harabim, the Oni grabs it from the hands of the Balabais, which means the Balabais picked up the bread in Rishus Hayochid. That's called an Akira. The Oni, on the other hand, took it out of his hand, and that's called a Hanocha. But neither one of them single-handedly did the Akira and Hanocha, and that's the Shein Arba that are not Chai, but rather a Potter. Mara says, I can't maintain such a pshat. Why? The Mishnah is very consistent. The Shtayim Shein Arba Negoim, Shtayim Shein Arba in Shabbos, they have to be similar. Ma Hasam Kul Chiyuva, right? The Chiyuv of Negoim means that he has to be Matayr himself if he contracts Tumas Negoim. And we're going to say that what? That Kula L'Chiyuva, right? There are going to be 4 variations of Negoim. There'll be Baheres and Se'es, and then there's going to be Toldos. So you're going to have 4, but they all require Tahara. Whether it's an Av or a Tol, there's no difference. It's Af Hocha here too, Kula Chiyuva. Here too, in the case of Shabbos, we should say that all 4 variations, Shtayim Shein Arba, are L'Chiyuv. Now you're telling me that 2 out of the 4 are Potter. El Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, I'm going to find a different distinction between our Mishnah here in Shavuos and the Mishnah in Shabbos. Hasam over there in Shabbos, the Iker Shabbos Tani Chiyuve Upture. In other words, the Mishnah wants to address all scenarios, some of which you're chayav for and some of which you're potter. And the Mishnah wants to tell you the chiddush that because you're missing a certain condition in the chiyuv hotzah, therefore you're potter. Aval hach, but here Maseches Shavuos, who's interested in Pture? Chiyuve tani, Pture log tani. Gemara doesn't like it. Chiyuve ma'niu yitzios. Right, it says yitzios hashabbos Shtayim Shein Arba. And the Gemara understands that the word yitzios in the Mishnah means hotzos. And Yitzias Tarti Udahavin. There are only 2 scenarios in which you could be chayev for hotzah. Hotzah meaning from Rishus HaYochid out into the Rishus HaRabim. Either the Oni takes something from the hand of the Balbais and brings it out, or the Oshir has something in his hand and he puts it in. So how could it say Shtayim Shein Arba if it's Kula L'Chiyuve? So the Gemara answers, L'shtayim d'hotzah, l'shtayim d'achnasa. That the word Yitzios doesn't indicate the limited interpretation of hotzah from Rishus HaYochid out into Rishus HaRabim, but rather the word Yitzias HaShabbos is a generic, all-encompassing term, and it includes even the toldo, which is achnasa, when you take something from Rishus HaRabim into Rishus HaYochid, and now we have Shtayim Shein Arba. So the Gemara is not happy with that. How could you say that the word Yitzios could include within it Hachnasa? It can't include Hachnasa. It says Otzah. Our Tana, he says, uses the word Yitzios or Otzah as a generic term which indicates anything that comes under that malacha, whether it's the Av, which is Otzah, whether it's the Tolda, which is Hachnasa. So the Gemara says, "Mimai." Can you find me some sort of a precedent that the Tana uses the word Yitzia to indicate even Achnasa?